Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking again with Jason Littlefield. Jason is the founder of Empowered Pathways and a co-founder of Free Black Thought. Hey Jason, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. So how you been since the last time we spoke? Things have seems to have gotten a little bit crazier.
Things have gotten a little crazier. The things that concerned me then concern me even more so now. Some interesting, I guess, updates since last time we spoke. Last time we spoke, what was happening in the background was that my profession, my job as a social and emotional learning specialist, was being completely colonized. Uh, my job description, they wiped that clean. They wrote a new job description that included having to put forth the ideology and having to teach that as truth and having to believe in it. They actually wrote that into the job description, and I had to reapply for my job. And I was guaranteed to get that job, but I could not, in my good heart and conscience, work towards eroding uh, individual sovereignty and autonomy and putting forth this ideology that was negatively impacting our social and emotional well-being. So I've spent the last year trying to elevate that conversation and figure out how do we immediately impact the culture, because if we don't impact the culture and the hearts and minds of the people in our culture right now, then this idea of the individual that came up during the Enlightenment will be lost for good.
Yeah, I don't know
That's
if
a
I want to say.
lot.
Yeah, I mean, like just the one last thing. Like I don't know if I want to say lost for good, but yeah, it's going
For
to
a
be lost.
while.
Yeah, for a while. One of the things I'd said a little while back, it was after I read David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity, and he talks about pockets of enlightenment throughout time. And I said, I don't want another Deutsch in 500 years or 1,000 years writing another book like that and talking about us as a pocket of enlightenment, at one point or other that kind of ate itself up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I think what concerns me is on the not too distant horizon, we do have the fourth industrial revolution and this economic idea of stakeholder capitalism staring humanity in the eyes right now. So I'm just wondering if those two things are accelerated, perhaps it might be lost.
Yeah. I mean, I think people take enlightenment values and, you know, those individual freedoms and those individual rights, I think people take them for granted. And it also, I think it depends on where you are. Like if you are
Mhm.
in a secular, quote unquote, Western democracy, like enlightenment democracy, like I think in those places, it's being taken for granted. But if you're in a place like Afghanistan, they want those things and they need them.
Right. It's being taken for granted so much that people still think you hear people talk about both sides of the argument. I think people still think that both sides represent an aspect of that Enlightenment classical liberal society. But what's happened is that the sides have actually shifted philosophically, but people are still playing a political divide and have no idea that just that their basic principle of how they get to live their life, and that is what is under attack, and that future generations have a threat of not living under.
Yeah. I mean, I want to like kind of tie this to something you said. You said your profession had been colonized. You know, so when you're talking about that, so that was like how did it change? Like how did SEL change from what you were doing originally, and then when you said when it became colonized, like because I mentioned something like along those lines about something like CBT. I'm like, okay, CBT is supposed to give you the tools so that you can, fight your anxieties and everything on your own. If there's something very serious, then you can go back to therapy. But it's meant to give you a set of tools so you can, be fairly autonomous. But if you give the people the wrong set of tools, it's going to make things worse. And I'm just wondering, is that like the same kind of thing that happened with SEL?
That's exactly the same thing that happened to SEL, and it was a slow burn. This past year, I've seen a lot of people online and a lot of like, oh my God, SEL is bad, and that was something that I started to question on my own team around 2017 or 2018, because I noticed that the types of trainings that we were attending were starting to shift. We I remember after one training, I said to a colleague, I was like, uh, philosophically speaking, this is some sort of Marxism, some sort of Maoist. I was a history major student and a history teacher for a while, so I recognized what was happening. And I said, we really need to talk about our tools. I heard you just mention, if we're using ineffective tools. I said, we really need to look at our tools, because, and I came at it from a professional, from a social and emotional learning specialist, oh wow, as a professional, this is what I'm seeing. I noticed that whenever you dissolve the individual into a group stereotype identity, it reinforces our in-group bias. All humans, we lean towards an in-group bias, and we are all wired survivally for the capacities of prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. And I noticed that dissolving the individual and putting us in groups against each other was strengthening the human capacity of prejudice, aggression, and cruelty, and strengthening that in-group bias, especially adding layers of shame and resentment. Was like, this is wreaking emotional havoc on people, and it's destroying relationships, and it has nothing to do with increasing human potential and getting and building relationships. This is a political, philosophical approach, and it's damaging. And I tried to have that conversation from 2018, 29, all the way up until 2020, when, as I said, my job description, the whole job description was wiped away. And that came from the national organization, CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. They're the ones that decide and dictate what happens in social and emotional learning curriculum K-12. And I've addressed them. I've asked to speak, like, hey, can we have a meeting to discuss this, because the ideas that we're putting forth are wreaking havoc on human beings' social and emotional well-being. And those calls have gone ignored. However, I am working with schools and continuing to work with people that want a humanity-centered social and emotional learning framework, because A, humans are socially emotional creatures, and B, in this moment in time, we're in the midst of a social and emotional crisis. So we need assistance, and we need to be using a different set of tools rather than the political tools.
Yeah, I mean, I know you'd mentioned like Maoist or Marxist. I don't really have an issue with that, but I mean, I just try to use collectivist. It's just,
Yeah.
it's like it rhymes with it. It's got shades of it. It's,
Mm-hmm.
and follow this stuff back. I mean, John McWhorter and James Lindsay compare it to religion. I've like found similarities with Islam, and it's just so like, in my mind, I just want to, like, it's just it's just a lot cleaner. I don't want to get into that other debate about whether it's Maoism or Marxism or whatever. It just, collectivism covers it.
I
Uh,
agree. I agree 100%.
like something you'd mentioned as well, it bothers me, and I see the similarities with the conversation around Islam in this as well. It, People are still turning their wheels. We're still arguing about whether it's Marxism. We're still arguing about this. We're still arguing about, okay, I mentioned James Lindsay. I like James. I get along with him. There's some things I disagree with him about, but
Right.
you know what? If James came out with something insanely egregious, then whatever, fine. I'd say, I think you're wrong. But for the most part, like people that I see are like, oh well, I don't want to be like him. I can't speak out against this because of people like James Lindsay. It was the same thing with the Islam debate. It was like, oh, we don't want to let bad actors take over the conversation, and they spent so much time talking about that they did let truly bad actors take over that conversation, and then they just painted everyone who was in that conversation with that brush. And it's the same thing that's happening here. You're having a secondary or tertiary argument about what the important issues are, and you're not actually dealing with the issues you should be dealing with. And it's just, we at this point, it should just be, yes, this is bad, let's fix this. And sorry, I'm gonna ramble, but like you talked about both sides. There's no both sides. There's multiple sides here, and like my side is Enlightenment values.
Mm-hmm.
I want to push those, and I'm just looking at. Yeah, I'm worried about the overcorrections. I think there's a lot of overcorrections coming from other sides, and it's the pushback against this. But we used to have institutions that we could trust to be rational and sane to push back against the exegesis of any side or anything that was coming up. But those institutions now have gone to, for the most part, to this woke extreme. And so we don't have anything left. And that's where my worry is. It's like you let this stuff, because you were worried about who was a good actor and a bad actor and what the right way of discussing this was, instead of just saying this is wrong, let's fix this, you let that, this ideology get itself entrenched in most of our institutions, like most of our sense making. And it's being corrupted by this.
What I wish is that individuals within all of those institutions and in society would realize and discuss that essentially what is under attack now are those Enlightenment values. Like if we could have a values and principles conversation versus a policy or opinion conversation, and reestablish what core values are important to us and guide our policies and procedures around those Enlightenment values, we would be better off. And that's the message that I'm hoping to do through Empowered Pathways and through Free Black Thought, is to bring attention to what is happening here is just this simple principle Enlightenment idea of the individual. That is what is under attack. And I do believe that all individuals want to live their life how they see fit without hurting people. And they want that for future generations. But the ideology and the institutional gatekeepers are preventing those conversations from happening. I believe that if we could say, this is bad, what is something else that we can do? And we start doing that, then we'll be better off. And I've been really focused on trying to offer the solutions that I've created.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, because you'd mentioned you're working schools, like, and if you can try to get that in, like, this is where my worry is with a lot of this stuff is, you're talking about the Enlightenment values, and we can talk about, there's things on like, fundamentalist Christian side, the evangelical right, all that, but they're not in control of a lot of these things. So what I'm worried about is, like, if you take CRT, it's explicitly anti-Enlightenment. And if the
Hmm.
curriculum is being based on that, and people are, I mean, now it's commonplace to hear that treating people as individuals and not as a member of a group is racism.
I've been hearing that since 2018. From
Yeah.
that was one of the ideas that I pushed back immediately on in my working group.
So, I mean, you mentioned Castle and how they're, you know, framing K through 12 and stuff. And I'm worried about this in that because, okay, the one example I use all the time, because it was, I think, one of the most highly publicized one, was the Dalton Academy in New York City, Dalton School, right? So K through 8. Like, I don't know if you've heard about this or read about it or whatever, but this was in 2015. Like I said, it was written about in, like, New York Times, New York Post. You can find it in a few other places. They took their kids. They took the kids from grade 3 to grade 8. They sent letters home to all the kids, to the parents, and said, "Okay, let us know what race your child identifies with." And this was especially important for mixed race kids. And then for 45 minutes a week, they took the kids apart, put them in quote unquote affinity groups, and then they told all the kids of any race except for white ones that they were oppressed and that they'd be oppressed by white people, and that how they're starting off from, like, so far back, and they're just basically telling these kids they had no future. And then they told the white kids that you've oppressed all these people, you've done all this bad thing, you've caused all these issues. And like I said, this is from starting from grade 3. Within a few months, all the kids, like not just the white ones, but all the kids started spouting off ethno-nationalist rhetoric. They were going online seeing what's good about my race, what's bad about the other races, and they were, you know, go online and you're gonna go down some weird rabbit holes, and
Yep.
end up with, like, Richard Spencer, or end up with, what's the guy from, like, Farrakhan, or things like that, right? Like, and I'm like, okay, you've done this. There's been other studies where they took people, you're talking about group, in group and out group. Okay, you're the chocolate ice cream team, you're the vanilla ice cream team, and even with that, you had people starting to treat each other, like, very cruelly.
Right. That's
And I'm
that's
just like,
the
yeah, like, you're ruining kids. You're turning kids, like, they're going to be maladjusted. They're going to be looking for an external reason why they're not doing well, or they're going to be feeling like they're being singled out as the cause of everything. Like, I use the example of, there's that African proverb, the child that isn't embraced, by the village will, feel the warmth from the fire when he burns it down. Like, I'm like, you're telling kids that the village doesn't love them. You're telling them that everything is out for them, or that they're the cause of all the evil. And I'm like,
right.
you know they're easy pickings for anyone. They're easy pickings for, white supremacists. They're easy pickings for cults. They're easy picking for, gangs,
Yep.
anything.
Yep.
And it's like, that's what worries me. It's like, if enough people believe that Enlightenment values are evil and racist, and they were created by white people just to uphold white supremacy, there there's nothing left to fight for, and there's no one left to fight for it.
Right. And what if that those ideas are lost? What if the writings and the over time, what if that those concepts that John Locke wrote about, what if those people don't even have access to those concepts 20, 30, 50 years down the road, And so let's look at, if you're a kid, let's look at that oppressed oppressor label. If you have been given the oppressed label and you believe it, what do? And the only thing I can think of is you lash out seeking revenge, or you just give up. And if you are given the privileged, the oppressor label, and you believe that, then you either wear that like a badge of honor and you continue to oppress people, or you give up. So the ideology is, it's purposed to remove autonomy. So if you get half the people giving up and not doing anything, and then the other half are clashing, physically fighting, that's the perpetual state of society. And a healthy society cannot set itself up in a way to where half of the populace has given up and then the other half is engaged in physical and violent conflict.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, you just take the three shootings recently that were highly publicized. So there was the one in Buffalo, there was the one just the other day in Texas.
Uvalde.
Uvalde. Okay, I couldn't. And then there was the one in California. I think it was the same weekend as the Buffalo one. It was in the Taiwanese church, and it was a Chinese person who was because of China's position on Taiwan. Now, like, I'm not defending any of these shooters. I'm not defending, but I'm just saying that the one in Buffalo and the one in Texas, they were both 18 years old, I believe. So look at 18 years old. Go back to when Trump got elected, so 2016. They were what, 12 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, like when I started looking at this, there's about 18 states that had, CRT based curriculum from K through 12. And so, and then forget the schools, like, are they getting it online? Like, it's just, everywhere you look, you are being reinforced with this stuff. You're looking in the media, article after article about what's racist, what's not racist, how white people are, white people are stopping people of color from going hiking. Like, really?
Yeah, I saw that article.
No,
I
but I
saw
mean,
that article.
but you can trace these back to like 2012, 2013. There was just, articles in Portland about how, like, as early as like 2010, as far as I can tell, about how, biking, like cycling, was racist. And I'm like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Every so those articles and all of the trainings and things that I attended over the years, I realized that every virtue, every value, every philosophy associated with not just the Enlightenment, but all ideas that promote the individual. Aristotle ethics, just simple, basic ideas were perceived and being presented as white supremacy, racist, or whiteness. And that is the exact same tactic that Trotsky used in 1927 to label people that spoke out against communism. They were identified as racist. So this notion of I'm not going to speak out because I'll be considered racist, is an extremely old tactic that kind of really ultimately led to a lot of genocide.
Okay, but I'll take it quite a few steps further back than that. So you talked about, okay, are we going to lose this thought? Are we going to lose what, Locke wrote, what Paine wrote, what Mill wrote? And, I worry about that. So if you go back to the golden age of Islam, so that's roughly from 800 to about 1100 or 1200, like that, in that rough period. So around the end of the 9th century, there's a guy that came about called Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali was given the title The Proof of Islam. And what was said about his writings was, if you lost the Quran and the Hadith, so the Quran, obviously, and the Hadith are the saying and the doings of the Prophet, if you lost those, you could almost rebuild the entirety of Islam just by Al-Ghazali's writings. Okay, so like that's how this guy was revered. He was,
okay.
And I mean, there were other thinkers at the time as well who were revered, but he, as far as a religious aspect, his writings on that side. And he wrote this book called The Incoherencies of the Philosophers. And he took to task the Greek thinkings that were being pushed by thinkers of the time. And it was all being done in Babylon Baghdad, because Baghdad was the crossroads, and like it was in the Near East. So you're getting people from the Far East, you're getting people from Europe, you're getting people from Africa, all meeting there, and they were changing ideas. And he he just took it apart. And like basically his idea was, he was a Sufi, and one of the tenets of Sufism is everything is done for the praise and the glory of Islam and Allah. Now, he took that to an extreme, and he said that we don't need to study, we don't need new mathematics. Everything that we have is enough. We don't need any new philosophies. Everything that we have is enough, because you only need to glorify that which is in Islam. After he wrote that book, there were other thinkers. There, I think it was, I believe it was Averroes, or it might have been Avicenna, who wrote, the incoherencies of the incoherencies, basically a line by line refutation of it, or passage by passage refutation of it. But Al-Ghazali's view had the ear of the Caliph. His view took over. By the time the Mongols sacked Baghdad in the 1200s, that viewpoint of we don't need to go out and get more information had taken over. So when the Mongol, like, they came in and sacked Baghdad, they destroyed the library. It was called the House of Wisdom. And they completely destroyed that. And the knowledge then, Chinese, Indians, whatever, took it back to where they were. Some of it went to Europe. And when the Mongols receded and the caliphate started up again, Al-Ghazali's viewpoint took over. So thinkers of that time, from that period, like I'd mentioned Avicenna and Averroes, but there are so many others, they were banned in the Middle East. And they're still, to this day, they're banned in large portions of the Middle East. Like, you can't get that writing freely and openly. You have to, go search for it on the internet and dig it up. But their writings made it to Europe, as did Al-Ghazali's. And Al-Ghazali's writings made it to Aquinas. And Aquinas, when he wrote how to, like, some of his rules for how to burn heretics at the stake and things like that, he took Al-Ghazali's writings and they informed him on that. Whereas the other ones who also came into Europe, they were talking about the Greek traditions. They were talking about individualism. They were talking, they were discussing, you had Aristotelian philosophers, you had Platonian philosophers, you had, they were discussing all this thing back and forth. And I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it was part of the reason that you got Enlightenment thought coming into Europe, because they preserved that knowledge while Europe was in the Dark Ages.
Right.
And so
that's very true.
And if you look at the Middle East to this day, there's a really great organization called Ideas Beyond Borders. And what they do is they translate, I think they're translating Wikipedia articles, but they're also translating books on science and philosophy and books about the Enlightenment into Arabic, Farsi, Kurdish, and they're making it available for free. And during COVID, they were doing a lot of announcements and putting that out and letting people know, like, okay, this is what you need to do. They were translating all that. I mean, there's still that statistic. And this is an old one, but it might have changed, but this was from, I think, 2006. There were more books translated into Spanish in 1 year that had been translated into Arabic in the past 1,000 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So when you're talking about people losing thought, like, Ideas Beyond Borders, when they're looking to do their translation, they had to come up with a term for secularism, because there was no term in the Middle East for that. There was no term in Arabic for that kind of thinking, because it had been wiped out. And sorry, I don't mean to go on so long about this, but one of the things also you'd mentioned was the colonization. They use that. They use post-colonial thought. So when they want to push back on Enlightenment values, or they want to push back, they said, oh, this is colonizing from the Westerner. Instead of celebrating that, Westerners got this from the Middle East. They got it from Persians and North Africans and Arabs, and these are the people who were studying in Baghdad, and that's where the West got. That's what kept these ideas alive. So it's not Western thought coming back in. It's the Middle East and North Africa region bringing back their own thinking, but they use the post-colonialism in the West. I mean, it's going down into South Africa as well. They wanted, like, was it last year, the year before? They wanted to put out black physics, because you needed a black physics, because the other physics was a white centric physics. I'm like, physics is physics. So right. I mean, this has effects everywhere else. And yes, if we lose it, we lose it. And like I said, 1,000 years in the Middle East, you had what, 2, 3 Nobel Prizes come out of those countries. Like, it has an effect.
Yeah. So you touched on something that's really important for us living in this time to understand and consider that those Enlightenment values were influenced by Islam and other parts of the world, that those are the ideas that are meant to advance our lives, that are meant to advance our personal well-being, that those are the ideas all over the world that rose to the top, and that our shared history as a human species has put forth some amazing ideas, and it's up to this generation to preserve and pass on those ideas and to question what is happening in our institutions. Because every if everybody or a lot of people would say no thank you, we don't operate like that, we do believe in rational thought and compassion and kindness and individual liberty and finding ways to promote and protect an individual rights. We're not focused on constantly destroying society. I heard you mention, South Africa. You're in Canada. I get emails and things from people in Britain like, this is happening in my small town. What do I do? We see what's happening in New Zealand and Australia. If the world's we're kind of in a being conquered phase, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. The quote goes back to Aristotle, what I think people attribute to um, um, the guy who started the Jesuits. But anyways, give me the child until he's 7, I'll give you the man, right? So if you start them young and you're teaching them this stuff, they're getting this. They're again, I compare it to a fundamentalist religion. I say, like, K through 12 are being turned into woke madrasas, and it's it's not that every kid who goes to a madrasa is going to join ISIS or the Taliban. It's if you let the kids alone and they were in that religious milieu, because I mean, when you look at like a Muslim country that's under Sharia, you have that religious stuff blasted at you all the time as well, not just in school. But if the school system was actually teaching rational thought and critical thinking, you'd still have a certain percentage that are going to go extreme, but you'd have more that won't. But the thing that I think you'd have more of is right now with the madrasas, you have a core that no, they won't do that. They won't go out and kill apostates. They won't go out, but they will support it and they agree with it and they think it's the right thing to do. Whereas if you taught that rational thought, they might be faithful, they might be pious, they might be whatever, but they don't agree with that aspect of it and they will question it. And that's really what you need. You need that willingness to question. You need that willingness to look for the other things, because I mean, again, I'll go back to the Muslim world. Like if you look at apologists for Islam that come out of there and people who are trying to push this stuff, they've in the last 10 years, they've been getting more and more exposure to it because of the internet, but they didn't even know which questions to ask because they were never exposed to that. They were even never exposed that there was another way of looking at it. Right. So that's the kind of stuff I worry about. It's if we lose this now, there's nowhere else in the world. And when I say we, I'm talking about, like I said, liberal, like Enlightenment built societies. Like there's nowhere else in the world that is pushing this. And it's, Ideas Beyond Borders is able to do that in the Middle East because it's a friend of mine who started it. He's an Iraqi refugee. He came to the U.S. and he wants to help his home country, or his his country of his birth, and he wants to help them. But if the enterprise dies here, he's got nothing to help them with.
Right.
Like he translates some of Steven Pinker's books. If Steven Pinker's books are all banned and there's nothing for him to translate, what's he going to do? Right. It's like, that's like, yeah, I don't want to have to wait. Well, whatever, obviously we won't be around, but society shouldn't have to wait another 300 or 400 years for these ideas to be rekindled and then have to be hard fought, bring back the victories, and then, get to where we were, in the late 90s. Like,
right. Well, and so the fourth industrial revolution and the advent of, or the merging of inorganic matter into our organic matter, the merging of man and technology, once that happens, even in 300 years, will humans be autonomous? That's and nobody knows that. That's why I think it's really important to latch on and to reconfigure around our, those Enlightenment, classical liberal values, because once it's lost, it might be lost for good. And it was only not even 300 years in existence. And I heard you mention the 90s. That was kind of a sweet spot of that vision actualized.
Yeah. Okay. That's why, I mentioned the 90s, and I looked at it from when I just started reading, like I got at a university in the mid 90s. So I got some experience with postmodernism and some experience with post-colonialism. I did a poli-sci degree, so I got exposed to that. But I left in the mid 90s. Then I went and worked in IT. I didn't have anything to do with this. So, but when I started reading CRT and intersectionality and some of the Derek Bell stuff and Audre Lorde, all that, and I'm reading that stuff, and then you look at when it came out in universities. So you always had like African American studies and that kind of stuff. You always had like a certain aspect of this, but I think it was 89 when Kimberly Crenshaw at a conference coined the term critical race theory. And that's when, like all the books under that title started coming out. But intersectionality as a framework got introduced into the academy, somewhere between 89 and 91. Like you can go back and kind of check, Crenshaw's first paper on that was in 89. Then she did mapping the margins in 91. And then you had, Peggy McIntosh and all these other people writing about intersectionality from there. But those first people that got that intersectional framework and started coming out with graduate degrees and PhDs came out in the late 90s and went into the workforce. So that's kind of when that cultural shift started happening. Mm-hmm. So I use that, and I've heard John McWhorter say the same thing, like we need to go back to a 97 way of thinking. And he kind of specifies that year, but I'm like, it's somewhere in the late 90s to the early 2000s, like, that shift happened. Like you were saying, it was a slow burn, like it's slow, then it's really fast.
Right. Right. And I hold that 1997 year in special reverence as well. I didn't know that he mentioned that specific year, but I heard you, the thing about intersectionality, and in Crenshaw's writing, she specifically prioritizes identity over humanity. So when an aspect of our identity is more important than our shared humanity, there will always be conflict.
Yeah. No. If you read the first paper, I forget what it's called. It's intersections or something or whatever. It actually laid out, what she's talking about, and there was some sense to it. It was fairly rational. It was the second paper, mapping the margins. When you start reading it again, she's talking about some important stuff at the start, but then you get near the end, and that's what she says. We need to get away from this liberal ethic. We need to get away from this idea of individualism, and we have to have an identity-based politics. She maps it, like she maps it out in that paper.
Yep. And there's no plan. Once we erode the liberal order, what do we build? There's none of that. And I just, what I'm having a hard time really understanding is how people are still believing, advancing, and accepting this destructive ideology.
I don't know. It's just because it comes wrapped in such nice language. Like, again, it's what Jonathan Rauch called, like, the humanitarian threat to liberal science. It's, it's anti-racism, or we're fighting transphobia, or we're fighting homophobia, where, it sounds good. And then something Carl Sagan said, like, it's people want a reassuring fable instead of a harsh truth, and that's you want the truth might not be pretty, but it's going to help you out the most. And this idealistic sense of, oh, we're going to make it more equitable, or it's going to be anti-racist. I mean, um, it's like that. They're it's a sugar coated poison pill that they're giving you, that you take it, and by the time you're into it so far, up that point, you're either indoctrinated, or you're a pariah for not accepting it.
Yep. Yep. And that's what I'm hoping to disrupt in our culture. And it's a constant struggle.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, again, I like, I think it's, you'd mentioned the technology aspect of that. And you know, the way I look at it is, so if you want to talk about social media, but a lot of these people who got into tech, I mean, they were obviously, they were, like, I work in tech, whatever. They were geeks and nerds in high school, right? They were geeks and nerds, and they wanted to make a better world. And then technology, up until the communication revolution, technology was about making lives easier.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a washing machine, it's a hell of a lot better than a washboard and scrubbing your clothes, right?
Right.
It saves you some time. You can do other stuff. We took technology and we did the same thing. Like, this is my issue with the technology aspect of it. I don't want to talk about embedded microchips or anything like that, but it just, up to this point, like, go online, or you're watching TV and there's an ad for how you can get your mortgage, on the internet in 10 minutes, and how easy that is. I mean, shouldn't you want to take a little bit more than 10 minutes for your mortgage? I mean, it's a pretty important thing, right? Like,
right.
We've made everything so easy, and we're just, whatever is going on in schools, that's one thing. But if you make people's lives so easy where they don't have to actually look into something, they don't actually have to look for it. Like, I joke around and I said it's the fault of travel mugs, because they're basically just sippy cups for adults. So, like, when adults say they need a sippy cup, they're not good for anything else. But you've made everything so easy. That's my issue with the technology. Like, even Google, you made, oh, I just saw it on Google, but you didn't teach the people how to validate that information. You just gave them something, and it was easy. You gave them what you thought they wanted instead of what they needed. And it's like, I think that's where we have to slow ourselves down and get back. Like, if you want to stop this, technological / industrial revolution coming along the way, like, you have to get people to unplug and get people to take a step back. Like, I bought my nephew, when he was 6 years old, I bought him a little iPad mini, and I kind of regret it now. I think that, no, maybe kids don't need all that stuff until they're a little bit older, and they can, go out and play in the mud and get dirty and build a fort and do whatever and figure things out, instead of, oh, how do I do this? I'll just go online and look. And it's not the same. Like, there's my issue with the technology is with that. It's, you treated information the same way you treated a washing machine, something quicker and better and faster. And you lose a lot there.
Well, and it's made us very comfortable, very complacent, and reinforced our tribal echo chambers. So maybe that's why we're having a hard time breaking free of the ideology and moving beyond it.
Well, I mean, like, I see some good things happening, that's some pushback, but I'm worried about that as well. And I'm worried about it for the same reason that what happened with the political correctness stuff in the late 80s, early 90s. So when Netflix says, okay, if you're woke or whatever, they didn't use the term woke, but, this is, if you want to get away from, they fired a bunch of people. They said, we're no longer going to go along with this. Whatever, Musk, you'll even have Bezos right now speaking out against ESG. But a lot of people are like, oh, see, the tide is turning. I'm like, yeah, the tide is turning right at the front end. I mean, if I can go back to technology, but the back end is still screwed up. Until you
Right.
fix up that back end, it's a war of attrition. Like it was the same thing with the political correctness stuff. Oh, see, we pushed back against this nonsense. It just went back into the academy. It went a little bit more underground, and then like I said, end of the '90s, early 2000s, it started coming out, going back into the administration, going back into you know creating the departments of equity and all that stuff, and then the speech codes and all that came out of it, and we're where we are now.
Yep.
And so I again, maybe I read too much of it. I'm just kind of like, I have a certain bias by I'm seeing it everywhere, but it goes back to the idea of the long march through the institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're ready for that marathon. Like for them, it's not a sprint. And so if it gets pushed back now, then we'll just go back to the institutions and we'll just get in there deeper and we'll come back with it and it'll be reborn under a new name.
Well, I don't know if it can be pushed back or stopped. Just seeing how it's taken off in Germany and in Great Britain and everywhere, seeing how that it is taking off in every single Western democratized nation. It's not just, and sometimes I wonder if you guys are experiencing it more than we are in the States.
Yeah, we're so far gone.
I feel like y'all have accelerated it beyond
no.
what we have.
We are 100%. Okay, so in Canada, this stuff it wasn't up until about, I'd say around 2000. Well, 2015 was when Trudeau got elected, but around 2013, you could start seeing the CRT based curriculum encroaching in some parts of Canada in some schools in K through 12, right? Like I don't want to make it sound like it was exploding, like it was everywhere in 2013, but you started seeing the rise of it. But before that, even going back to the late 80s, it was more of a post-colonial lens that we were looking at. So it was, the First Nations, we'd colonize them and things. And I don't want to, take away from anything. Like I lived in Inuit communities. I can tell you about all the horrible stuff that was done, but it was just kind of wallowing in it. But now when you had that CRT stuff infused in it, so it was going back to in the late 90s, we had this thing in our government and it was no one really paid attention to it. No one really did anything about it. It wasn't followed through, but you had to have a gender-based analysis for legislation stuff. But it was basically intersectionality, right? Mm-hmm. You had to look at things, but it was just kind of something in the background. It was like a nice little piece of wording, but no one paid attention to it. It wasn't. In 2015, when Trudeau first got elected, he changed it to gender-based analysis plus. And it had to have it. And so you were like the fisheries department would have to do a gender-based analysis on fishing quotas if they're doing a policy on fishing quotas. Like, I don't know how that works. But the government themselves, when they put out things like Bill C-16, where, self-ID, if you didn't identify someone by the gender that they identified as, so if I called you a sir and you identified as a woman and you wanted to be identified as ma'am or she or her, I could technically be brought up to the Human Rights Council in Canada.
Wow.
And then in Trudeau's election in 2019, he changed our Ministry of Multiculturalism into the Ministry of Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth. And the mandate of that ministry is to make sure that all of government, all policies, everything fall under, like they have an anti-racist secretariat to make sure that all government ministries and all government departments are being anti-racist. And we're well ahead with, it's against the law if you don't affirm a child's gender, or anyone's gender. Like and so therapists are worried that if you try to do anything but gender affirmation care, they could lose their licenses. It just recently, pediatricians were, because of the long wait for kids to get puberty blockers and this and that, they're without even a consultation, because it's taking so long to get a consultation at a gender clinic. Pediatricians are just writing up prescriptions for puberty blockers. I mean, yeah, we're much farther along than you guys are. It's, it's in one of the major banks in Canada put out a job posting where it was only Indigenous people. Our national broadcaster, advertises for, like, we'll hire anyone except for white people. Like, I mean, um, yeah, we're, it's awful up here.
So I think people have to think and just like, is this the world? Is this what we want to build? Is this what we want to pass on? What are these ideas going to look like accelerated? And in
Yeah,
my mind, it looks awful. In my mind, people are miserable and governments have absolute control.
to me, it's not even so much that governments have absolute control. It's that, okay, going back to those mass shootings, these these people were made to be so unstable that they got indoctrinated really easily.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing, I mean, I follow a lot of teachers, and the amount of violence in schools right now, and it's, for policies that said, okay, don't punish black kids, don't send them on suspensions or whatever, or, because it's racist if you do, because the disparity makes it racist and all this stuff. Like, you're seeing so much of this. You're seeing, like, the people are going to call out to the government for protection. It was, okay, so this was in Haiti, when Aristide, this was in like the early 2000s. He wanted to cement power, and so what he did was he released, and I mean, this was done in the Middle East and everything as well. He released gangs from prison, and so the people got scared and they asked for police protection, so the police were able to crack down. So, uh, I'm not trying to say that there's a mastermind, like, Trudeau is not a mastermind. Okay, but if every school, every individual is thinking like this, and they're pushing this stuff out, and there's more violence in the streets, people are going to get afraid. And when anyone offers them a solution, like, oh, we'll take more control, we'll bring it in, they're going to go with the person they think is going to be able to best control that. So it's not so much the government taking it away, it's just that this stuff is going to scare enough people so that they'll want someone to come in. They'll willingly give it away for their security, right?
Yep. You know that a lot of states released a lot of prisoners during COVID, at the onset of COVID, if you remember that. Speaking of the person that released the prisoners, but that happened in the States. I don't know if that happened up in Canada, where prisoners were released from jails at the onset of COVID.
I don't remember hearing about that, but I mean, there was so much stuff going on that
Right,
I might have
right.
missed it, but yeah. No, but I mean, like, the releasing the prisoners. Okay, again, I mean, I think that, we can talk about prisons in the States. Like, everyone who's in there for, like, simple pot possession, get them the hell out of prison. They don't
Right,
deserve to. Okay,
right, right.
so if they were releasing people like that, okay, but I mean, were they releasing murderers and rapists and, like, serious violent criminals? That's a different story. Um, but like I said, I don't know what was going on up here with that, but it's just, again, it's just, for me, it's the mentality of, okay, like Trudeau does it all the time. Our government does it all the time. When the truckers protested up here, I mean, right away, they're all racist and misogynistic, and people just bought it and go along with it. That's one thing in Canada. I mean, there used to be a joke in the 80s that the only thing we're proud of is we're not Americans, and all anyone has to do is say, that's American style politics. Oh, you're using American politics, or you're using Trump politics. Why are you bringing American politics up into Canada? But at the same point, they're pushing CRT. I'm like, well, CRT is based off American legal, jurisprudence. Like, who's bringing American politics into government now? Like,
Right. That's very true.
yeah, but yeah, no, we're kind of screwed up here. But, like, I still, the K through 12 stuff, like with the SEL, how are teachers doing this? Like, teachers are not qualified social workers and therapists and counselors. Yeah, I know schools have counselors, but like, what's your thought on that? Like, I'm just like, again, even if they were the best tools in the world, if the person's not qualified to use them,
Right.
like, you give the best steel and everything to some guy who's never been a blacksmith in his life, he's not going to make you a good sword. Like it's
Right. Well, so SEL is it was originally, and I believe it's still intended to be a what we call a tier one intervention, which means it's something that is for everybody. It's non-invasive, it's non-specific, it's just general self-reflection, self-management, breathing techniques, how do we create opportunities for people to get along and build relationships. That's what it's supposed to be, but with the shift to the intersectional ideology, teachers are seem to be taking it to a different level to really try to tug at those feelings of shame and resentment, to really try to get that activated. Some people feel like they're if they make people cry, or if they make people really like distraught about their beliefs, especially if those beliefs are the classical liberal beliefs, then they feel that they have done something good and beneficial. Essentially, people are using the tool of SEL in a destructive way. They think that they're using this thing that is building, but it is destroying. They are actually destroying personal well-being and the ability to form cross-group trusting relationships. If I view somebody as my oppressor, or somebody that I am oppressing, I'm not going to be able to really build a strong, positive, trusting relationship with that person. So the intersectional world is not only breaking down the individual, but it is preventing cross group trusting relationships. And it's a divide and conquer political strategy.
It's a divide and conquer, and like, I agree with what you're saying, but one of the things that I really don't like about it is, I mean, it's counter to reality. Okay, when you have a large percentage of Democrat voters who think thousands of black people are killed by police every year, when the real number is like 18 or something like that, or 20, let's just say, but there's a huge gulf there. Or Bill Maher was reading these stats the other day, or a few weeks back, so whatever, take it for whatever it's worth, but it was something like 50% of Democrats thought if you got COVID, you were going to end up in ICU. Now, the real number is nowhere near that. Like they were like, if you got COVID, you were going to go into the ICU. I mean, and that's like half of registered Democratic voters were thinking that. A man giving birth, I'm sorry, like, when the AMA falls behind the line that a man can give birth, and they're denying basic biology, why should I trust them about a COVID vaccine? Why should I trust them about anything else? Like, it's, people are being untethered from reality at the same point as they're being told to look for group divisions, and they're not, they speak in terms of inclusivity and all that, but they're actually looking for ways, like you said, to divide and conquer. I mean, but like, no one knows what's real anymore, and that's, I mean, you see the conspiracy theories, this and that. It's like, okay, again, go back to any place that's had censorship, go back to any place that's had control.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories come out of the woodwork because no one knows what to believe anymore, so they're going to believe whatever feels good to them. And it's like, you're throwing people so off balance and so off kilter that, I mean, you're causing a lot of issues, and it just, and And again, it's if it's being done by teachers, you go to a seminar for a weekend and you come back and you're like trying to institute this stuff in your classroom, like you're not going to succeed. And it just like that's what I'm worried about that future generation, because when I'm being selfish, when I'm an old fart, I want my doctor to worry about what's wrong with me, not what the color of my skin is, or whether or not I identify as male or female or any of the other 72 genders, for Christ's sakes.
Right. Well, that's the world we are building, and that's why I'm working to disrupt it in the culture. My focus and my plan, my solution idea is to intercept what is happening in the culture. But I don't know if we're going to be able to do that or not. But got a couple of things that we're going to try and see if we can energize people in the culture and people in their workplaces and people in school communities.
Just curious, are you like, I know you're working with Free Black Thought and Eric Smith to, with your version, well, with the original concept of SEL and trying to put that out there. But are you also looking at working with groups like FAIR or maybe Counterweight or anything like that to, try to get more traction in institutions? Or do you want to like,
I will say I'm presenting at a conference for Counterweight in September.
Mm-hmm.
FAIR hasn't really showed a lot of interest, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. Okay. But I am hoping to find organizations and people that are pro Enlightenment and pro the individual and believe in sovereignty and autonomy, and how can we increase personal well-being, how can we increase human relationships, how can we unite the 98% of us that really believe in the individual, how do we break down those barriers? So I'm definitely looking for organizations, people to channel my energy into preventing what is happening in the culture, and not preventing, it's already happened. The train has already left the station. So I'm hoping to meet with those that are interested in stopping the ideology before it becomes deadly. Because as you know, collectivism, however it's worded and branded, there is always a deadly end. There's always a deadly end to collectivism. So I feel that if we can reflect on that and begin to disrupt and dismantle it in the culture, perhaps it won't reach that deadly end this time.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to keep you too much longer on Sunday morning, but I just curious, like, if you can turn back, some school districts, I don't think you're going to be able to fix the entire public school system in the US. Like but I mean, if you could turn back a few, but would you also be looking at, like, there's plenty of teachers who were fired or had to resign because they oppose this stuff. Would you be looking at maybe, like, okay, giving them the tools, so if they wanted to start little pod schools in neighborhoods and things like that, where parents were like, we're fed up, we don't want to send our kids to these schools, they don't like the other options, they want to start up a pod school or things like that, like, would you want to do that, or would you want to just solely focus on, like, trying to get the organizations and the institutions working?
I would assist there as well. Really, anybody, any organization that is looking for tools and resources to push back in a productive, in a healthy, in a pro-enlightenment, a pro-compassionate way, those are people that I'm interested in working with and putting forth our message. I believe that we're in a moment of an existential crisis, and that it is up to us, this generation, to act properly now. And I'm looking to facilitate those opportunities.
Yeah, I'd be going back to the like, kind of just going off that, but like going back to the religious thing, like John McWhorter. So I can't remember where he was being interviewed. I think it might have been for Reason, but he was talking about like you're seeing the birth of a new religion, and it's I'm like, okay, I forget the name of the emperor before Constantine, but he was the one who made Christianity like you could practice it in the Roman Empire, but he didn't adopt it. It was Constantine and was the first one to adopt it, right? It's just always I'm like, that's what Biden is. Biden is the emperor before Constantine who is allowing this stuff to go in like whatever call it the empire, whatever, but go through the US.
Yeah.
And then the next one is going to be the Constantine who embraces it, and it's just like I said, we've got it, we've got it with our Liberal Party, we've got it with our there's the Liberal Party is our far left party now, but we've also got the other part. They were called the New Democratic Party. They were actually a workers' party and blue collar party, but now they're all focused on race and they're pushing this stuff instead of focusing on class. Our Green Party is the same thing. It's just like our government's fully embraced it.
And what you'll notice, I'm sure you see that those it has shifted away from the worker. This ideology is shift. It is a bourgeoisie ideology. Like it is something that is believed by elite people, and they are using it to put their thumb down on the common person.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something again goes back to education. It goes back to when I was in school. Is they started pushing that thing? Everyone had to go to college, and
I remember that.
Like I don't think it was blue collar work and manual labor was so looked down upon, and it's like, oh, it's the low people that do that, and that mentality has grown and grown and grown. So yeah, they they don't want to be, it's like, oh, I'm going to be unclean if I touch these people, right? If I go near them, I'm going to get besmirched. But yeah, I mean, you need like a lot of these people haven't built anything, and they don't know. I get my food from the grocery store. It's like, no, like they don't know how to fix. They don't know how to like change a light fixture. They don't know how to change a tire. They can't do like the basic stuff, and it just. But they sneer at the people who do this work because they think it's beneath them, and it just,
So that's a good example right there of how the ideology, the philosophy of this has damaged the individual. People can't fix, they don't have those they don't have those skills anymore. And I remember the early 2000s was that everybody goes to college push. I was teaching, and I disagreed with that. I was like, this is not, and I taught at a trade school where students would graduate with some sort of certificate in welding, nurse practitioner, cosmetology, woodworking. And looking back on the early 2000s, the everybody goes to college, that's when they were really teaching the ideology. That's when they were really teaching this in the college. So we were forcing everybody to go get this indoctrination.
But even in the late 80s, like I graduated high school in 87, and we were, if you don't get a college degree, you're not going to get a job. The only jobs you're going to get are going to be manual labor, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm not saying the universities were as far left back then as they are now, but it was still there. Like that, the seeds of it were born about back then, where like you need that college education, you need it. And I mean, okay, I got a poli-sci background. I work in IT. Like, okay, thanks to my education, I do well on Jeopardy, but that's about it. Like,
right.
But yeah, look, like I said, I don't want to keep it too much longer. So if you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you, if you want to have any last words, or if you words of encouragement, even because I think we're kind of like a bit of a downer.
Oh man.